The dust swirled around Jake Martinez's boots as he rode into the small town of Red Canyon. His horse, a sturdy Mustang named Thunder, snorted and shook its head, tired from the long journey across the desert. Jake pulled his hat down low, shielding his eyes from the harsh afternoon sun. He had been riding for 3 days straight, looking for work and a place to rest. Red Canyon was not much to look at. A few wooden buildings lined the main street, their paint faded and peeling from years under the scorching Arizona sun. The saloon sat at the center of town, its swinging doors creaking in the hot wind. Next to it stood the general store, a small church, and the sheriff's office. At the end of the street, Jake could see a modest house with a white picket fence, different from the other rough buildings. Jake tied Thunder to the hitching post outside the saloon and stepped inside. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the heat outside. A few local ranchers sat at tables, nursing their drinks and talking in low voices. The bartender, a heavy-set man with graying hair, looked up as Jake approached. "What can I get you, stranger?" the bartender asked, wiping down a glass with a dirty rag. "Just a beer and some information," Jake replied, placing a coin on the wooden bar. "I'm looking for work. Heard there might be some cattle ranchers around here needing hands." The bartender poured the beer and slid it across the bar. "You're in luck. The Dawson Ranch, about 10 miles north, has been looking for cowboys. Lost a few men last month when they decided to head to California for the gold rush." He paused and studied Jake's face. "You look like you know your way around cattle." Jake nodded, taking a long drink of the cold beer. "Been working ranches since I was 15. Apache blood runs in my veins, so I know this land well." He had learned long ago to be upfront about his heritage. Some folks had problems with it, but honest work spoke louder than bloodlines. "Apache, eh?" The bartender's expression remained neutral. "Well, Samuel Dawson is a fair man. He cares more about what a man can do than where he comes from. But I should warn you about something." The man leaned closer and lowered his voice. "His daughter Elena has been troubled lately. Lost her husband in an accident about a year ago. Beautiful woman. But she keeps to herself now. Some say she's given up on life." Jake's interest was piqued, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's a sad thing to hear. Losing someone you love can break a person's spirit." "Indeed it can," the bartender agreed. "She used to be the life of every town gathering. Now she barely comes to town except for supplies. Her father worries about her constantly." After finishing his beer, Jake rode north toward the Dawson Ranch. The landscape was breathtaking in its harsh beauty. Red rock formations jutted up from the desert floor like ancient monuments. Sagebrush and cacti dotted the terrain, while mountains rose in the distance, their peaks purple against the evening sky. The Dawson Ranch was impressive. A large wooden house sat on a small hill surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. Jake could see hundreds of cattle grazing in the distance, and several cowboys were working near the barn. As he rode up to the main house, a tall man with silver hair stepped onto the porch. "You must be looking for work," the man called out. "I'm Samuel Dawson. Word travels fast in these parts." Jake dismounted and walked toward the porch, removing his hat respectfully. "Yes, sir. Jake Martinez. I heard you might need experienced hands." Samuel looked him up and down, taking in Jake's weathered appearance and well-maintained gear. "You look like you've spent plenty of time in the saddle. Where have you worked before?" "Ranches in Texas and New Mexico mostly." "I know cattle, horses, and this desert country. My grandmother was Apache, taught me to read the land and the weather." "Good," Samuel nodded approvingly. "We need men who understand this territory. The job pays $30 a month plus meals and a bunk in the bunkhouse. You interested?" "Yes, sir, very much so." As they shook hands, Jake caught a glimpse of movement in one of the upstairs windows of the house. A woman's silhouette appeared briefly before stepping back into the shadows. Even from that distance, he could sense something melancholy about the figure. Samuel noticed Jake's glance toward the window. "That would be my daughter, Elena. She keeps to herself these days." His voice carried the weight of a father's concern. That evening, Jake settled into the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands. There were 6 men in total. Old Pete, who had worked ranches for 40 years, young Tommy fresh from Missouri, Carlos from Mexico, and 3 others who had been with the Dawson Ranch for several years. They welcomed Jake warmly, sharing stories and advice about working the ranch. "The boss is good to work for," Pete told Jake as they sat around a small fire outside the bunkhouse. "Fair wages, decent food, and he doesn't ask a man to do anything he wouldn't do himself. But the family has been through hard times. Tommy nodded gravely. Mrs. Elena used to bring us fresh cookies and lemonade when we worked near the house. Always had a smile and a kind word. Now we barely see her. What happened to her husband? Jake asked, genuinely curious about the woman he had glimpsed. Carlos spoke up, his accent thick but his English clear. David was a good man. He and Elena were childhood sweethearts, married young and seemed happy as could be. He was helping to break in a new horse when it threw him, hit his head on a rock. He crossed himself. He died 3 days later. Elena has been like a ghost ever since. The next morning, Jake was assigned to help move a herd of cattle to new grazing land. The work was familiar and satisfying. He felt at home on horseback, working with the other cowboys to guide the large animals across the desert terrain. His Apache heritage served him well, as he could read the subtle signs in the landscape that warned of dangers or indicated the best routes. During lunch break, while the men rested in the shade of some cottonwood trees near a stream, Jake heard the sound of a horse approaching. He looked up to see a woman riding toward them on a beautiful black mare. Even from a distance, he could tell this was Elena Dawson. She was indeed beautiful, with long dark hair that caught the sunlight and pale skin that spoke of too many hours spent indoors. But what struck Jake most was the sadness that seemed to surround her like a heavy cloak. Her shoulders were slumped, and her eyes stared straight ahead without really seeing. Eleanor rode up to where the men sat and dismounted gracefully. "Father asked me to bring you fresh water," she said quietly, producing several canteens from her saddlebags. Her voice was soft and musical, but empty of any joy. The cowboys thanked her politely, but Jake noticed how they all seemed uncomfortable around her, as if her sadness was contagious. She handed him a canteen, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Jake saw intelligence there, and pain so deep it made his chest ache. "You're the new man," she said simply. "Jake Martinez." "Yes, ma'am. Pleased to meet you." Elena nodded but said nothing more. She remounted her horse and rode back toward the ranch house without another word. Jake watched her go, noting how she sat straight in the saddle but seemed to carry an invisible weight. "She used to laugh all the time," Pete said sadly, following Jake's gaze. "Prettiest laugh you ever heard. Now look at her." That evening, Jake found himself thinking about Elena as he groomed Thunder. There was something about her that called to him, beyond just her beauty. Perhaps it was the sadness he recognized, having lost his own share of people over the years. Or maybe it was the way she had looked at him, as if she was searching for something she couldn't name. Over the following weeks, Jake settled into the rhythm of ranch life. The work was hard but rewarding, and he got along well with the other men. Samuel Dawson proved to be an excellent boss, treating his workers fairly and with respect. Jake's skills with horses and cattle quickly earned him the older man's appreciation. He began to see Elena more often, though always from a distance. She would sometimes ride out to check on the cattle or bring supplies to the working men, but she never stayed long or engaged in conversation. Jake noticed that she seemed most at peace when she was alone with her horse riding across the open desert. One afternoon, while Jake was repairing fence near the house, he heard the sound of someone crying. The sound came from a small garden behind the main house, hidden from view by a stand of cottonwood trees. Jake hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but something about the desperate quality of the sobbing made him investigate. He found Elena sitting on a wooden bench among some wildflowers, her face buried in her hands. She was crying as if her heart was breaking all over again. Jake stood quietly for a moment, unsure whether to approach or leave her to her grief. The decision was made for him when Elena looked up and saw him standing there. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks wet with tears. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. "I'm sorry," Jake said softly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "I heard. It's all right," Elena said, wiping her face with a handkerchief. "I suppose I'm not as private as I thought." Jake took a few steps closer. Sometimes grief needs to come out. Keeping it locked inside only makes it stronger. Elena looked at him with surprise. "You speak as someone who knows." "I've lost people too," Jake admitted. "My parents, my brother, friends. The pain never really goes away, but it can change into something you can live with." For the first time since he had arrived at the ranch, Elena really looked at Jake. She saw a man in his early 30s, tall and lean from years of hard work. His dark hair showed his mixed heritage, and his brown eyes held kindness along with their own share of pain. There was something solid and dependable about him. something that made her feel less alone. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly. "How do you keep going when the person who made life worth living is gone?" Jake sat down on the bench beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "At first you don't. You just survive one day at a time. Then slowly, you start to remember that life has other meanings too. The sunrise, the feeling of rain on your face, the satisfaction of honest work. Small things that add up to something bigger." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "David and I were going to have children," she said finally. "We had names picked out, a cradle built. Now that future is gone too." "Maybe that particular future is gone," Jake said gently. "But that doesn't mean all futures are gone. Just different ones than you planned." Elena turned to look at him fully. "Why are you being kind to me? Most people either avoid me or try to cheer me up with empty words." "'Cause I see someone who's drowning," Jake said honestly, "and I know what that feels like." They sat in silence for a while, watching the desert wind move through the cottonwood leaves. Finally, Elena stood up. "Thank you for not telling me that everything happens for a reason, or that David is in a better place now," she said. "Those words always feel like lies." "Sometimes terrible things just happen," Jake agreed. "There's no reason for them, and no comfort in pretending there is." Elena looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of respect. "You're different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know, but not someone who would understand." As she walked back toward the house, Jake felt something shift inside his chest. He had not come to the Dawson Ranch looking for anything more than work and wages, but watching Elena's solitary figure disappear through the garden gate, he realized that she had awakened something in him he thought was dead. That night, as he lay in his bunk listening to the other cowboys snore, Jake stared up at the ceiling and thought about Elena's tear-stained face. He had meant what he said about grief changing into something you could live with. What he hadn't said was that sometimes, if you were very lucky, life gave you something new to care about. The question was whether Elena would ever be ready to let someone care about her again, and whether Jake was brave enough to try to reach someone who was so lost in her own pain. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their voices carrying notes of loneliness that echoed Jake's own feelings. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, another chance to prove his worth to Samuel Dawson, and perhaps another opportunity to show Elena that not all of life's surprises were cruel ones. Jake closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but Elena's face kept appearing in his mind. He had seen many beautiful women in his travels, but none had affected him like this. There was something about her combination of strength and vulnerability that called to every protective instinct he possessed. He thought about the way she had looked when she was crying, so completely lost in her grief that she was unaware of anything else, and then how she had focused on him when he spoke, as if his words were a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. Jake had learned long ago that you couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved, but he sensed that somewhere deep inside, Elena was fighting to surface from the dark water of her sorrow. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her find her way back to the light. The weeks that followed Jake's conversation with Elena in the garden brought subtle changes to the rhythm of ranch life. Elena began appearing more often when Jake was working near the house, though she maintained her quiet, distant manner. Sometimes she would watch him work with the horses from her bedroom window, and Jake could feel her eyes on him even when he couldn't see her. One morning, Samuel Dawson approached Jake while he was saddling Thunder for the day's work. The older man's expression was thoughtful, and Jake sensed this was more than a casual conversation. "Jake, I've been watching you work these past weeks," Samuel began. "You have a way with horses I've rarely seen. That wild stallion we've been trying to break for months actually lets you near him now." Jake nodded, stroking Thunder's neck. "Horses respond to patience and respect. Force just makes them more afraid." "I was wondering if you might be willing to take on a special project," Samuel continued. "Elena's mare, Midnight, has been acting strange lately. Won't let anyone near her except Elena, and even then she's skittish. The vet says there's nothing physically wrong, but something has spooked her badly." "I'd be happy to take a look," Jake said. "Sometimes horses pick up on their owner's emotions." "If Elena is hurting, Midnight might be reflecting that." Samuel's eyes sharpened with interest. "You think my daughter's grief is affecting her horse?" "It's possible. Horses are sensitive creatures. They form deep bonds with their riders." That afternoon, Jake found Elena in the stable, brushing Midnight's coat with long, methodical strokes. The mare was indeed agitated, her ears constantly swiveling, and her muscles tense under her glossy black coat. Elena looked up when Jake approached, wariness flickering in her eyes. "Your father asked me to look at Midnight," Jake explained. "He's concerned about her behavior." Elena's jaw tightened slightly. "There's nothing wrong with her. She's just particular about who she trusts." "May I?" Jake asked, gesturing toward the horse. Elena stepped aside reluctantly. Jake approached Midnight slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. The mare snorted and backed away, but Jake didn't pursue her. Instead, he stood perfectly still and continued talking, letting the horse get used to his presence. "What are you doing?" Elena asked after several minutes of this patient waiting. "Letting her know I'm not a threat," Jake replied quietly. "Fear makes every creature defensive. The only way past it is to prove you're safe." As if to demonstrate his point, Midnight took a cautious step toward Jake, then another. Soon she was close enough for him to reach out and touch her neck. The mare trembled but didn't pull away. Eleanor watched this interaction with growing amazement. "How did you do that?" "She won't let anyone else near her." "I didn't try to force anything," Jake said, still stroking the horse's neck gently. Sometimes the best way to help someone is just to be present and patient. Elena caught the double meaning in his words and looked at him sharply. "Are you talking about my horse or about me?" Jake met her gaze steadily, maybe both. For a long moment, they stood in the stable looking at each other while Midnight continued to calm under Jake's gentle touch. Elena felt something stir inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced since David's death. It frightened her. "I should go," she said abruptly, turning toward the stable door. "Elena, wait," Jake called softly. She stopped but didn't turn around. "What?" "If you ever want to talk, I'm a good listener." Elena's shoulders tensed. "I don't need anyone to listen to me." "Everyone needs someone to listen," Jake said, "even people who think they're better off alone." Elena left without responding, but Jake noticed that she glanced back at him before disappearing around the corner of the stable. Over the next few days, Jake continued working with Midnight. The mare's condition improved dramatically under his patient care, and soon she was back to her normal, spirited self. Elena watched these sessions with growing curiosity, though she tried to hide her interest. One evening, as Jake was finishing up with Midnight, Elena approached the stable. She had clearly been working in her garden, as there was dirt under her fingernails and her dress showed grass stains.
"Thank you," she said simply.
"For helping Midnight. She's a beautiful horse," Jake replied. "She just needed someone to understand what was troubling her." Elena stroked Midnight's nose affectionately. "David gave her to me for my 20th birthday. She was just a filly then, wild and unbroken. He said she reminded him of me." This was the first time Elena had mentioned her late husband's name in Jake's presence. He sensed the importance of the moment and chose his words carefully. "He must have seen your strength," Jake said. "It takes strength to gentle a wild horse." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away this time. "I don't feel strong anymore." "Strength isn't about not feeling pain," Jake said gently. "It's about continuing to live and love despite the pain." "How can you be so sure about these things?" Elena asked. "Sometimes I think you're too young to speak with such certainty." Jake was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. "I told you I lost people," he said finally. "What I didn't tell you was that one of them was my wife." Elena's eyes widened in surprise. "You were married?" "Her name was Maria. She died of fever 3 years ago, along with our unborn child." Jake's voice remained steady, but Elena could see the old pain in his eyes. "For a long time, I thought my life was over too." Elena felt a strange mixture of sympathy and something else she couldn't quite name. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The point is, I understand what you're going through, the emptiness, the feeling that nothing will ever matter again. But I also know that life has a way of surprising you." "What do you mean?" Jake looked directly at her. "I mean that sometimes, when you think you're completely alone, you find someone who understands. Someone who doesn't try to fix you or rush you or tell you to move on. Someone who just accepts that you're broken and cares about you anyway." Elena felt her heart beating faster. She recognized the meaning behind his words, and it both thrilled and terrified her. "Jake, I can't. I'm not asking you for anything," Jake said quickly. "I just want you to know that you're not as alone as you think." That night, Elena lay in her bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, her thoughts were focused on something other than David's absence. Jake's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of his gentle hands calming midnight and the way he had looked at her with such understanding. She thought about the similarities between her situation and Jake's. They had both lost spouses, both experienced the devastating emptiness that followed such a loss. But Jake had somehow found his way back to hope, while she remained trapped in her grief. The next morning brought news that would change everything. A rider arrived at dawn with word that Apache raiders had been spotted in the area. They had attacked a ranch 20 miles south, stealing horses and cattle. Samuel immediately called a meeting of all his ranch hands. "I don't want to alarm anyone," Samuel told the gathered men, "but we need to be vigilant. The sheriff thinks they might be heading this way." Jake's expression grew serious. His Apache heritage put him in a delicate position. While he had never lived with a tribe and considered himself fully American, some people would automatically view him with suspicion if Apache raiders were in the area. "I think it would be best if I rode out to scout," Jake offered. "I know Apache ways and can read sign better than most." Samuel nodded gratefully.
"That would be helpful, but take someone with you." "I'll go alone," Jake said.
"I can move faster and quieter by myself." As Jake prepared to leave, Elena appeared at the stable. She looked pale and worried. "Is it true about the Apache raiders?" she asked. "Seems to be," Jake replied, checking his rifle and ammunition. "Will you be safe out there?" Jake paused in his preparations and looked at her. There was genuine concern in her voice, the first real emotion besides grief he had heard from her. "I'll be careful," he promised. "I know this country well." Elena moved closer. "Jake, some people might think because you're part Apache." "I know," Jake said quietly. "I've dealt with suspicion before, but your father trusts me, and that's what matters." "I trust you too," Elena said suddenly, surprising them both. Jake felt his heart skip. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Before he could lose his nerve, Jake reached out and gently touched Elena's hand. "Will you be here when I get back?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. The simple touch of his hand on hers sent electricity through her entire body. Jake mounted Thunder and rode out across the desert, following the trail left by the raiders. His tracking skills, learned from his Apache grandmother, served him well. The trail was clear to read. 5 men on horseback, driving stolen cattle. As he followed the trail deeper into the desert, Jake's mind kept returning to Elena's parting words and the look in her eyes. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, he had seen something other than grief there. He had seen care, concern, and maybe the beginning of something deeper. The trail led him to a hidden canyon where he could see smoke rising from a campfire. Jake dismounted and approached on foot, using every skill he had learned about moving silently across rough terrain. What he found when he reached a vantage point overlooking the camp made his blood run cold. There were indeed 5 Apache warriors, but they were young and looked desperate rather than confident. Their horses were thin, their clothes worn. These were not seasoned raiders, but desperate men driven by hunger and desperation. As Jake watched, he saw one of the warriors collapse from exhaustion. The others gathered around him, speaking in urgent, worried tones. Jake understood enough Apache to catch the words sick and dying. A moral dilemma presented itself. These men were technically criminals who had stolen cattle and threatened the safety of the ranch Jake worked for. But they were also fellow human beings in distress and part of his own heritage. Jake made a decision that would change the course of everything that followed. Instead of riding back to report their location to the sheriff, he approached the camp openly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. The Apache warriors immediately reached for their weapons, but Jake called out in their language, identifying himself and asking for parley. After a tense few moments, the eldest of the group, a man perhaps 30 years old, agreed to speak with him. What Jake learned in that conversation would haunt him for the rest of his life. These were not raiders from a hostile tribe, but the last survivors of a group that had been forced from their traditional lands by the government. They had been trying to reach family in Mexico when illness struck their group. The sick man was dying, and they had stolen the cattle in desperation, hoping to trade them for medicine and supplies. Jake found himself faced with an impossible choice. He could report their location and likely see them all hanged as thieves, or he could try to help them, potentially putting the Dawson Ranch and Elena at risk. As the sun began to set over the desert, painting the canyon walls red and gold, Jake made a decision that would test everything he believed about right and wrong, about loyalty and justice. He would try to find a third option, one that might save both the Apache survivors and protect the people he had come to care about. But first he had to get back to the ranch and find a way to explain the situation without causing panic or bloodshed. As he mounted Thunder and began the ride home, Jake wondered if Elena would still trust him once she learned the truth about what he had found in the desert. The ride back seemed longer than the journey out. Jake's mind raced with possible scenarios and solutions. By the time the lights of the Dawson Ranch came into view, he had formed a plan that was risky but might just work. He was surprised to see Elena waiting for him by the corral, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. When she saw him approaching, relief washed over her face. "Thank God you're safe," she said as he dismounted. "I was so worried." "Elena, I need to talk to your father right away," Jake said urgently. "And I need you to trust me, no matter what you hear." Elena searched his face in the moonlight. What she saw there was determination mixed with something that looked like fear. "What did you find out there?" "Something that's going to test every belief you have about right and wrong," Jake said. "But I promise you, I will never do anything to put you or your family in danger." As they walked toward the house together, Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet in more ways than one. The man beside her was clearly about to reveal something that would change everything. And despite her fear, she realized she was ready to face whatever was coming, as long as Jake was there to face it with her. Samuel Dawson listened in stunned silence as Jake explained what he had found in the hidden canyon. They sat in the ranch house parlor with Elena beside her father on the sofa and Jake standing near the window, his hat in his hands. The oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls as Jake described the desperate Apache survivors and their dying companion. "So they're not really raiders at all?" Samuel said slowly when Jake finished his account. "They're refugees." "That's right," Jake confirmed. "They took your cattle because they were desperate, not because they wanted to cause harm." "The sick man needs medicine, and they thought they could trade the beef for supplies." Elena had remained quiet during Jake's explanation, but now she spoke up. "What are you suggesting we do?" Jake took a deep breath. "I want to help them get to Mexico safely. In return, they'll return your cattle and promise never to bother this area again." Samuel stood and began pacing the room. "Jake, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but harboring criminals could get us all in serious trouble. The sheriff expects a report from you." "I know," Jake said, "and if you tell me to report them, I will. But I'm asking you to consider another way." Elena watched Jake's face as he spoke. She could see the internal struggle he was facing, torn between loyalty to the Dawson family and compassion for the suffering Apache. It was this very struggle that told her more about his character than any words could. "What exactly are you proposing?" Samuel asked. "Let me go back with medicine and supplies," Jake said. "I'll help their sick man and guide them safely to the Mexican border. In exchange, they return your cattle and leave this territory for good." "That's a dangerous plan," Samuel pointed out. "What if something goes wrong? What if they decide to take you hostage?" "They won't," Jake said with certainty. "I spoke with their leader. He's an honorable man in an impossible situation." Elena surprised everyone, including herself, by standing up suddenly. "I think we should help them." Both men turned to stare at her. She had spoken with more conviction than she had shown in months. "Elena," her father began, "this is dangerous business. So is letting innocent people die when we have the power to help them." Elena replied firmly. "Jake is right. These aren't vicious criminals. They're desperate people trying to survive." Jake felt something warm spread through his chest. Elena was not only supporting his plan, but showing a spark of the passionate woman she had been before tragedy struck her. Samuel looked between his daughter and Jake, seeing something in their faces that made him pause. Finally, he sighed. "All right, but I have conditions. First, you don't go alone, Jake. Take Carlos with you. He speaks Spanish and can help if you need to cross into Mexico. Second, I give you 3 days. If you're not back by then, I'm sending the sheriff after you." Jake nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Samuel. I won't forget this." "Don't thank me yet," Samuel warned. "If this goes wrong, we could all end up in jail." The next morning, Jake and Carlos loaded a pack horse with medical supplies, food, and blankets. Elena appeared as they were making final preparations, carrying a cloth bundle. "Medicine," she explained, handing it to Jake. "My mother's remedies. They might help the sick man." Jake took the bundle, their fingers brushing as he did so. The contact sent electricity through both of them. "Elena, if something happens to me out there," Jake began. Nothing will happen, Elena said firmly. You're coming back. How can you be so sure? Elena looked into his eyes with an intensity that took his breath away. Because I finally have something to live for again. I won't let you disappear now. Jake felt his heart stop. Elena, just come back to me, Jake. That's all I'm asking. Jake wanted to take her in his arms right then and there, but Carlos was watching. And Samuel might appear at any moment. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her face. I promise, he said softly. The ride to the hidden canyon took most of the day. When they arrived, Jake was relieved to see that the Apache was still there and that the sick man was still alive, though barely. Jake called out in Apache, and after a tense moment, the leader emerged from behind a boulder. The negotiations were delicate. Carlos stayed with the horses while Jake approached the camp alone. The Apache leader, who gave his name as Running Wolf, was initially suspicious of Jake's return. But when Jake showed him the medical supplies and explained the arrangement he had worked out with Samuel Dawson, hope flickered in the man's eyes. Why would you do this for us? Running Wolf asked in Apache. Because I understand what it means to be caught between two worlds, Jake replied in the same language, and because it's the right thing to do. The sick man, Running Wolf's younger brother, was suffering from infection and fever. Jake and Carlos worked through the night, using Elena's remedies and their own knowledge to fight the illness. By dawn, the fever had broken, and the young Apache was breathing easier. He will live, Running Wolf said with deep gratitude. You have saved my brother's life. Now you must save your own, Jake replied. Honor our agreement. Return the cattle and head for Mexico. Don't look back. Running Wolf nodded solemnly. We will remember this kindness. If you ever have need of Apache help, you have only to ask. The journey back to the ranch took 2 days, with the Apache driving the stolen cattle ahead of them. They left the herd in a valley a mile from the Dawson ranch and disappeared into the desert like ghosts. Jake and Carlos watched them go, knowing they were witnessing the end of an era. When Jake and Carlos rode into the ranch yard leading the recovered cattle, they were met by cheers from the other cowboys and a tremendous hug from Samuel Dawson. I can't believe you pulled it off, Samuel said, clapping Jake on the back. No one was hurt, the cattle are back, and the Apache are gone. The sheriff will be very pleased. But Jake's eyes were searching for Elena. He found her standing in the doorway of the house, her hands clasped in front of her. When their eyes met, she smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her since arriving at the ranch. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the other men had gone to the bunkhouse, Jake found Elena in her garden. She was sitting on the same bench where he had first found her crying, but now she looked peaceful rather than grief-stricken. You kept your promise, she said as he approached. I told you I would come back. Elena stood and walked toward him. Jake, what you did out there? It was brave and kind and completely crazy. Maybe, Jake admitted, but it felt right. My father says the whole territory is talking about it already. How Jake Martinez negotiated with Apache raiders and saved the day without firing a shot. Jake shrugged. Stories get bigger in the telling. Elena stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell the lavender scent of her hair. Do you know what this means for you? Your reputation as a peacemaker will spread. Ranchers all over the territory will want to hire you. Jake felt a stab of panic. Elena, I don't want to leave. I know, she said softly, and I don't want you to go. They stood looking at each other in the moonlight, both aware that they had reached a turning point. Finally, Elena spoke the words that had been building in her heart for weeks. I think I'm falling in love with you, Jake Martinez.
Jake's breath caught in his throat.
Elena, I know it's too soon. I know people will say I haven't grieved long enough, but my heart doesn't seem to care about what people think anymore. Jake reached out and cupped her face in his hands. I fell in love with you the first day I saw you crying in this garden. Not because you were beautiful, though you are. Not because you were vulnerable, though you were. But because I saw someone fighting to survive the worst thing that could happen to a person. I was drowning, Elena whispered. We both were, Jake replied. But somehow we found each other. When Jake kissed her, it was gentle and full of all the longing and hope they had both been carrying. Elena felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower opening to sunlight. It didn't erase her love for David or take away the pain of losing him, but it added something new and precious to her life. When they broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against Jake's chest. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of loving someone again and losing them. I don't think I could survive it twice. Jake lifted her chin so she was looking at him. I can't promise nothing will ever happen to me. Life is uncertain and dangerous, but I can promise that I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live. That's all anyone can promise, isn't it? Elena said. And maybe it's enough. Over the following months, Jake and Elena's relationship grew stronger. The scandal Elena had feared never materialized. The people of Red Canyon and the surrounding ranches had heard the story of how Jake had risked his life to save Apache refugees and recover stolen cattle without bloodshed. His reputation as a man of courage and integrity preceded him everywhere he went. Samuel Dawson was delighted to see his daughter returning to life. The change in Elena was remarkable. Her laughter returned, and with it her joy in simple pleasures. She began helping with ranch work again, cooking for the cowboys and tending to injured animals with her old enthusiasm. Jake proved to Samuel that his initial assessment had been correct. He was not only an excellent cowboy, but a natural leader. Samuel began giving him more responsibility, and it became clear that Jake had a permanent place at the Dawson Ranch. One evening in late autumn, as Jake and Elena sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert red and gold, Jake took her hand in his. Elena, there's something I want to ask you. Elena's heart began to beat faster. What is it? Jake got down on one knee and pulled out a simple silver ring. I know we've both lost people we loved. I know that getting married again is a big step. But I also know that life is short and precious, and I don't want to waste any more time. Tears streamed down Elena's face, but these were tears of joy, not grief. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jake. I want to marry you. As Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, Elena felt the last of her loneliness fade away. She would never forget David or stop loving his memory, but she had learned that the human heart was capable of holding more than one love at a time. Their wedding took place the following spring, in the small church in Red Canyon. The entire community turned out to celebrate, including Running Wolf and two of his companions, who had risked crossing back into American territory to attend. As Jake and Elena exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever trials might come, Samuel Dawson wiped tears from his eyes. His daughter was herself again, stronger for having survived loss, wiser for having learned that life could surprise you with second chances. After the ceremony, as the celebration continued in the churchyard, Elena pulled Jake aside. Do you remember what you told me that first day in the garden? She asked. About grief changing into something you could live with? I remember. You were wrong about something, Elena said with a smile. It didn't just change into something I could it changed into something beautiful. Jake looked confused. How so? My grief taught me how precious love is. It made me grateful for every moment of happiness in a way I never was before. Without losing David, I might never have appreciated finding you. As they danced together under the desert stars, surrounded by friends and family, Jake marveled at how life had surprised them both. He had come to Red Canyon looking for work and had found love instead. Elena had been lost in loneliness and had discovered that hearts could heal and love again. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Jake and Elena would tell them the story of how loneliness brought them together, how patience and understanding can heal the deepest wounds, and how sometimes the best things in life come when you're not looking for them. The Dawson Ranch prospered under Jake's management after Samuel's retirement. Jake's reputation as a fair dealer and peacemaker brought business from all over the territory. More importantly, his marriage to Elena produced 3 children who grew up knowing that love could triumph over loss and that kindness was more powerful than violence. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Jake and Elena would sit together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in brilliant colors. Elena would rest her head on Jake's shoulder, and they would listen to the sounds of the desert night, grateful for the love they had found in the most unexpected circumstances. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to Red Canyon? Elena asked one such evening. Never, Jake replied, kissing the top of her head. I believe some things are meant to be. My heart was searching for you long before I knew you existed. Elena smiled and snuggled closer to her husband. In the distance, a coyote called to the moon, its voice no longer lonely but wild and free. Like their own hearts, it sang of the beauty that could be found in the vast, surprising landscape of love.